My name is Judy Heumann. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. My husband always teases me because I was born in Philadelphia, but I only lived there for 3 months. And so I think my nature is based on the fact that I grew up in Brooklyn, and you know the old saying, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And I think there's real truth in that. I had polio in 1949. I'm Jewish. My parents were basically refugees from Germany. My mother came over in 35, my father in 34, and they lost parents, grandparents in the war, and many other relatives. So I was the first of 3 children, and I had polio in 1949. And I'm 72 and a half. I became 72 and a half on June 18th. Half birthdays have always been kind of a important milestone in my life. I have no idea why. And I've had a very rich and completely unplanned for life. So I love to say, you know, to younger people who are talking about mapping out their future, you want to have a future in mind, but don't be too rigid because you have no idea where life could take you, and try to be open as much as possible. I've been very lucky over the course of my life to have been very involved with the development of what we call the independent living disability rights movement in the United States and internationally, and have worked with disability. We were all emerging leaders, you know, in the 60s and 70s. Many of us playing, I think, very important roles in the development of the political movement in the United States. And also kind of a unique time because we saw the development of centers for independent living, national disability rights organizations like DREDUS, and international groups like the International Disability Alliance. And major laws like Section 504, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and many others. So there's been a lot of progress that's been made over the course of my life, including the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is now ratified by about 181 countries. And the landscape is quite different from when I was growing up, when there was really no movement to really where there is an emerging movement, both domestically and internationally.
Thank you very much. So in your mind, given your vast knowledge and experience, has the ADA made the difference that you and so many visionaries expected it to?
So I think the ADA is an amazing piece of legislation. So it definitely has had a significant impact on changes in the United States. That being said, the ADA, if it was the only law that we had in place, no, the law itself cannot do, because it's not what it was meant to do. It's an anti-discrimination law that's very broad, but I think we need to look at the ADA as a piece of legislation that is continuing to fill in what we need, and the other laws that I mentioned earlier I think are very important, and there are other laws besides the ones that I've mentioned, like Section 508 and 501 and 502 and 503, and listeners may not know all those different provisions of law, but they're very important because they do things like require the government to be hiring disabled people, require contractors to be hiring disabled people, looking at issues of technology and accessibility. So those are all important pieces of legislation. And we need new and additional laws in areas like home and community-based services, because that's a huge issue. We need, in my view, more legislation in the area of housing. And we need really stronger enforcement of many of the laws that we already have. But given that this is the 30th anniversary of the ADA, I think it is a milestone piece of legislation. The effort that was taken nationally to bring about the Americans with Disabilities Act is historic in and of itself. And what I believe has been very important that we've been seeing is the newer generation. I don't feel comfortable with any of these words, but as younger people are growing up and recognizing what they've been benefiting from, both for the ADA and other laws, they also very much recognize that it's not enough. And the ADA generation, of which I consider myself part also, but the ADA generation of younger people, I think, very much sees that they are benefiting from the ADA, but that there is much more to do, and that they're taking on strong leadership roles. For me, when you look at the composite of these different laws, we're seeing some very important changes. While we still don't have the same rates of graduation from high school and entrances to college and graduation rates from college as other populations in the US, we still have been seeing increasing numbers of people graduating high school, attending colleges and universities, and graduating. And you can see as I meet more and more younger people who are working in the Googles and the Microsofts and many and the Center on American Progress and many other organizations, both public and private, where the influence of disabled people is really slowly emerging. And so I think we have a lot, we have results that are very important, and we also can see now the progress that we've made and what more we need to do. Now, clearly, what more we need to do is somewhat based on legislation, but when we're looking at remedies, and when I'm talking about remedies now, I believe that, you know, when we look at the unemployment rate of disabled people, it's much higher than for non-disabled people. And I think one of the reasons for that is people's skepticism, employers' skepticism about whether or not a disabled person, in fact, could really be a good employee. And so, you know, we have groups like Disability In and National Organization on Disability and others that have been working for a growing number of years with employers, getting employers on board in a more earnest way. But I would say that Section 503, all these mumbo jumbo letters, I'm sorry, but Section 503, which is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, is a very important tool because it basically says if your company is a contractor with the federal government, and there are many companies that are contractors with the federal government, that there is an aspirational goal of hiring 7% of your workforce as disabled people. So that, I think, is also one of the reasons why we're seeing more businesses really want to look at what they're doing, what they need to learn, and how they need to implement changes. So, you know, there are many different components at play here that are resulting in progress slowly being made, but still with huge gaps.
Thank you, Judy. What can people who find themselves in a position, they don't know all the acronyms, they don't know all the laws, they don't consider themselves activists necessarily, maybe they're advocates, or maybe they're just lay people who are learning, who are seeking knowledge. What advice or what inspiration, maybe that's the wrong word, I don't want to use the word inspiration, but what would you say would be a next step for people who are just wanting to take the ADA's intent further and create inclusive communities and work areas?
I believe it's important we talk about 61 million disabled people in the United States. They're obviously not all of work age, but I think many people who have disabilities do not necessarily identify as having a disability. So for me, that's one of the big objectives that we need to be working towards. And that is really helping people to identify and understand the scope of disability that the ADA and other laws cover. It's important that we as individuals really look at why we may feel ashamed of our disabilities. Whether or not we express it that way, I think it's a combination of shame and fear that we may not be talking about if we have diabetes or epilepsy or cancer or whatever you're invisible, anxiety or depression or bipolar or whatever. If we can feel, if we're able as a movement to really reach out to those millions of people who don't know that they may have a disability or may know that they have a disability, but don't have a community that they can be a part of because they're not aware of it. I think that's really one of the big issues that we need to be dealing with over the next 5 to 10 years, is really expanding our circle. And that circle, with its expansion, will also be a circle which is representative of race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, so that we can really show in our actions the richness of our community. And part of the issue of the richness of our community is, like many other communities, we have not been together. So people with intellectual disabilities are not necessarily involved with people who are blind or deaf or have physical disabilities. I think one of the beauties of the movement over the last 30 to 50 years is also that it really is becoming a more diverse community. And that diversity is not just race and religion and sexual orientation, it's also significantly by kind of disability. Because as some people have discussed, there is, in many ways, a hidden pecking order. The more you look and sound like a non-disabled person, the more you may be able to advance. And so I think that's another whole issue, that we really need to be one for all and all for one, and be able to understand and support each other. We need to continue to work on expanding our movement, not just getting those of us with disabilities who are identifying as disabled people becoming more active, but we talk about 61 million disabled people in the United States and at least 1 billion disabled people around the world. And our numbers as far as visibility and activity are not seen as strongly as what our real numbers are. So we're needing to be talking with people to allow them to understand what disabilities are in the United States, like anxiety and depression and bipolar and various learning disabilities and cancer and diabetes and epilepsy and we have hundreds of different types of disabilities. But if you don't understand that you may have a disability that will potentially result in discrimination, and you don't know your rights under the law, or you do know all of that, but you're a little ashamed or afraid of disclosing your disability for fear of you not being able to really be a part of your community, or fear of what could happen on the job. That's really, I think, one of the important parts of our movement growing and bringing the diversity that we represent, both by disability category, by race, by gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc. We are the largest, most diverse community in the United States or around the world. We need to relish in that, and we need to be able to ensure that the country and the world understand the breadth of who we are and why we're important. So when I think about the future, people ask me, what do you think is going to be in the next 30 years? And I really can't address 30 years. That's beyond what I'm willing to think about at this point. But I do think we can be looking at the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, where we really have to be learning about who we are. We need to have an understanding, for example, of disparities that may exist in various communities based on race and socioeconomic status, how there are people within the United States who are not benefiting from laws because they don't have the resources to hire an attorney or an advocate. And the government, in my view, is not always enforcing laws as they should be. When I worked in the Clinton administration and was an assistant secretary of the Office of Special Ed and Rehabilitative Services, it was really one of my objectives to have the federal government exercise its capacity to provide technical assistance with states and, to work with them in a reasonable way, but also to make them aware and families aware that the state departments of education, as an example, have a responsibility to ensure that disabled kids in their state are benefiting from IDEA and other pieces of legislation. So I think as our movement is growing, we also need to become more knowledgeable. Not everybody, because not everybody's interested in policy, but I think it is important that people know where the disability rights organizations are. So if they want to join, they can. Groups like the American Association of People with Disabilities, the National Association of the Deaf, the National Federation of the Blind, on and on and on, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, many, many different groups. I want to see our community grow. I want our community in its expansion to also become more demanding. And by that, I also mean our coverage in the media and representation of disability, I think most people would agree, is nowhere near where it needs to be. And that's one of the big problems I think that we also still face, is that we're not represented in advertising, in television, in documentaries, in film, and writers' rooms, on and on. So we're still needing to be throwing the cards up in the air, and as they're tumbling, quickly organizing them into appropriate sets and continuing to move forward.
Thank you. Excellent. That spoke to me on a personal level, and I'm sure it spoke to a lot of people, or will speak to a lot of people. Thank you for those words of wisdom. Is there anything else that you would like to share that you haven't shared?
Let's see. I mean, right now in this COVID period, I think we need to be networking as much as possible. We need to be really recognizing that COVID is not only having an impact on the health of some disabled individuals, but the economic impact is going to be quite significant. And attempts that are still being made to do things like repeal the ACA, I believe that people in the United States are gradually understanding that everyone should be getting health care, that people who are not insured are at great risk, and it has an adverse effect on our economy overall. So I think when we look at fighting for healthcare as an example, this is not just an issue for disabled people. This is an issue for all people in this country. And identifying ways that we, as a disability community, can continue to work with the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and their members, women's organizations, GLAAD, other LGBTQ organizations, religious groups, interfaith groups. These, I think, are very important audiences. And we need to be recognizing that budgets at the local, state, and federal level are things that we're going to have to be very involved in trying to help ensure that cuts are not going to put us back years. And so we can't, I think we must be activists, and we must look to many different organizations, including those in our communities, to really volunteer with those groups, learn from those groups, and be a part of activism in our communities.
Thank you. Judy, I want to just close with acknowledging you for being somebody who has gone through the blood, sweat, and tears with absolute determination, and whose actions, strategic actions, and activism have impacted the lives of so many people in so many ways that many are not aware of yet. We appreciate you, and thank you for being here with us today.
So I have two other quick things.
Yes.
If you haven't seen the movie Crip Camp, which is out on Netflix, I encourage you to look at it. And I also have a book that came out in February called Being Human. Thank you. And on Sunday, December 28th, in June, Crip Camp 2020 has been running Sunday discussions on different disability topics. And yesterday I had the privilege of having a dialogue with President Obama, who said that one thing that we all have in common is being human. And I quipped with him because that's the name of my book, Being Human, and my name is not spelled H-E-U-M-A-N-N, but H-E-U-M-A-N-N. But nonetheless, I think at the end of the day, what he said is very true. And that is one thing that we have in common, regardless of where we live in this world, or who knows what else is out there. But we are all humans. And at the end of the day, as disabled individuals, as we know, anyone can join our family at any point in time. And we don't want people fearful of that. We want people feeling that they, as non-disabled people or as disabled people, have a very important role to play in helping to ensure that our communities are welcoming and barriers are removed that allow us all to make our contributions. And I really want to say that it's an honor for me to be a part of this movement, and it's an honor for me to share with hundreds and hundreds of other disabled people activism and the belief that we can make a difference, and we are. So thanks so much for inviting me to do this.